welcome our guest speaker this afternoon, who's Brian Deegan. Brian is a technical director for walking and cycling for Urban Movements, which is a design practice that maximises the value of the public realm in meeting the challenges of climate change, urban growth, inactive lifestyles, and social exclusion. Brian is one of the UK's leading street design engineers and was co-author of the London Cycling Design Standards. With a background in engineering, he has also led high-profile policy and planning projects. He helped develop Transport for London's Healthy Street Check, a key tool in designing for healthy streets, and helped ensure the design quality of all projects associated with the London Mayor's £1 billion Cycling and Healthy Streets programme. As a street design all-rounder, Brian has expertise tackling the many and varied demands placed on complex urban streets and spaces, from design engineering, traffic modelling and network strategies through to conducting research to the highest industry standards. And he is passionate about making better streets. Brian has published several technical papers on cycle planning and recently led on the infrastructure chapter of the EU cycling strategy. I've heard Brian speak on numerous occasions, and he's very enthusiastic, very knowledgeable, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from him this afternoon. So I'll hand over to Brian now.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Sounds very impressive. I'll try not to let you down. Let's see if I can share this. Second. Go. I'm assuming that's sharing.
It is, thank you.
Excellent. I'm gonna full. Yeah, so I don't have to introduce myself, but you know who I am now. I'm just going to get straight into it, and I've got 40 minutes to take you through a lot of stuff. Now, I'm really going to concentrate on the case for active travel, really, and what's happening in the UK and best practice. I know you've talked a lot about like health and physical activity, so I'm going to cover health, but I'm just going to cover like air pollution and what we're doing about that. And I'm also going to look at safety, and then climate change and decarbonisation. That'll be the big finish. So I'll do policy, I'll do a little bit of practice, but I'll mainly get more comfortable when I look at the actual engineering details. So I'll talk about some actual things that have been delivered as well. So that's what's going to go through. But I thought I'd start off with like this picture really, which kind of says everything that I'm going to say in the next 40 minutes in one screen really, and in one picture. This is everything really. If we're going to tackle like health and we're going to get physical activity going, people need a reason to leave the house. That's part of like the Healthy Streets initiative, like that there's things to see and do, there's stuff to engage children, and it's all there. As you can see in the middle, we put some seesaws in the middle of a road. That's the plan somewhere in Bolton. And really, like the other thing it's doing is like stopping through motor traffic, which is the other thing we've got to do, that kind of safety impact, and also to reduce like the emissions from tailpipes, all the rest of it. So we've got what's known here as a modal filter, and I'll talk a lot about low traffic neighborhoods when we get on there, but we've got a low traffic neighborhood point, but we try and tie in with some kind of activity so there's a reason to walk there, so that getting to that supermarket on the right is actually a fun experience for the family and the kids can play there, and there's a like say a reason to get on there. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell, but let's break it down. I'm going to go through these 3 topic areas, and I'm going to show the kind of little bit of research and help make the case, and point out to some schemes that could reflect that. That's the plan. Let's see how we get on. I've got a lot of slides, but we'll get there. So air pollution used to be when I was working at Transport for London and we were pushing through like the Healthy Streets agenda, we thought that's it. It's about physical activity. That's the one that's going to resonate with everybody. Like nobody's doing enough exercise. If they do, then the risk of dying within the year drops by 10%. All the cases mounting. I'm sure you've heard that in the other sessions. But really what I'm finding these days is the air pollution is kind of where all the battle is. That seems to be resonating with people. I used to say like yeah, with physical activity, like there's a 10% chance that you get better if you're being more active, but air pollution is kind of killing everybody whether you're active or not. So it does seem to be like this kind of secret killer. And there's a couple of like headlines just to let you know what the situation is like in the UK, saying 1 in 19 deaths is linked to air quality and air pollution in our area, and that's equates to 40,000 people having early deaths a year. So it might be that it's taking a year off your life as opposed to physical activity, which could be taking 10 years off your life, but it's everybody. And it's this kind of silent killer that we have to tackle. And that seems to be where people are going. Certainly when you're trying to do active travel schemes in the UK, the case against it is often made on air quality grounds, that everybody's in cars. If you're doing something to inconvenience those people in cars, they'll go slower, they'll start giving off more pollution, and that'll be worse for the environment and worse for the area. In fact, the main campaigner against low traffic neighborhoods in the UK that's been really resonated is the mother of a daughter who died from like a pollution caused by cars, and that's the main person fighting against taking cars off the streets and putting more cyclists in there, because there's this short-term congestion thing. So I could have gone about congestion, but I think it's really important to kind of unpack these things. Are they true? What's going on? What can we do about them? And then we'll move into it. So just just to get into the actual facts of things, presented a few kind of like links here. One just like I think the table at the bottom kind of says it all, really, like where all the particulate matter, the PM10s, are coming from. They're all coming from cars, really, or rather 60% of it's from road transport. And I always like to point out these next facts. If you look at, of that 60%, 45% of the PM10s, and they can potentially put toxic metals into your lungs, cause heart attacks. There's plenty of papers showing that as soon as there's a congestion event, like trips to the A&E go right up with people having strokes and all the rest of it. So this is really serious stuff. Well, 45% of it's just from tires and brakes, and this is definitely the fact you need to keep saying when people say it's okay, the planet's going to be fine, air quality is going to be fine because we're going to do electric cars. And you go, well, that's only 15% of that 100% total. And 15% of like the 60% total road one. So we've still got the majority of it. It's coming from brakes and coming from the tires, and that's still particularly toxic in there. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of this over the next few slides. I'm really going to say it's the cars. It's the cars. What are we going to do about the cars? We've got 30 million of them in the UK, and the majority of them have got to go if we're going to meet any of our kind of climate change aspirations. But I'll save that for the big finish. And just the point, I'm sure you all know it as well, that diesel vehicles emit 22 times the particulate matter of like petrol cars. So one of the big things that's been happening across the UK is the kind of low emission zones. I'll come back to that as well. But just to keep piling on the stats before we do something about it, just bicycle production. Bikes aren't completely like free of CO2, and when you're riding around, yes, they are emission free, but there's some kind of like pollution involved in the process of making these metal things that go around. Walking's particularly efficient, we have to say, but you still got to fuel people for these things, and that's where that figure comes at the top. That 5 grams of CO2 per kilometer when you're on a bike. It requires human power generation, so people tend to eat a little bit more, but if they're being active, it's not so bad in health terms. But that's how they kind of quantified that 5 grams. Otherwise, you'd be saying really in terms of nitrous oxides and PM10s, it's very marginal. Whereas like cars and the maintenance, 42 grams of CO2. So you can see there's like an order of magnitude bigger. And the overall aim at the moment that we're working towards is decarbonisation. So I've looked at that really, whatever the issue is, cycling seems to be one of those solutions. Whatever, a few more stats, just well, it might help you make the case as well, because we all know this stuff, but sometimes when we're cornered by people going, why are you doing this? You're causing congestion, it's getting worse. It's nice to be able to draw on stats. So here's an interesting bit of analysis that one of the geographers in London did. You can see the big grey graph there of the normal nitrous oxides level on a high street in South London, and the red lines is when there's Ride London events going on. So that's a mass participation cycle ride, and you can see it's as clear as day, literally, that all the nitrous oxides go away. And we have to do these things in London, in particularly, where there's always people going to say, well, it's not the car's problem anyway, it's your HGVs, it's this, it's that. It's like don't do bikes, you'll cause pollution. And we have to go, well, look, that's what happens when you take cars away. That's the kind of flat line level of it. And then you kind of hope that stats come through. few more papers that I like to reference a lot, so I'm kind of putting them in there, and the references are down the bottom. And that's why I do a lot of work in Europe, particularly with the European Cyclists Federation, because they really help come up with great stats that can help use to make local changes. And this was an interesting report on the covered nitrous oxides in London, and looked at how we compared to like the EU levels. And we were way over. You can kind of see the kind of legal levels on the table at the bottom and how far exceeded we are. And this is the case across most places in Europe. It shouldn't have been just this that kind of sprung us into action, but the fact that people are now getting fined for exceeding it, and we're starting to see those fatalities clock up, and everybody losing those life years. So anyway, some really good evidence out there. A few more. This is a paper that I helped put together, well, many years ago now. It must have been about 10 years ago, but it's really important. Like, I helped make the case for doing protected bike lanes in the UK, basically on air quality terms, and how much nitrous oxides we could take out of the environment. And at the time, we're quantifying, if we just finished off part of the network that we're building, we could unlock another 360,000 journeys and take 453 tons of nitrous oxides, 333.8 tons of PM10s and PM2.5s and all those off the road. So we had a go at quantifying it. Really helped make the case to the mayor and to the local councils as well. They could see it. Everybody could kind of visualize how much that was. And when you explain, like particularly with like the particulate matters that one tiny microgram could bring on a stroke, and we're taking tons of it out the air, people have got kind of resonate to that. So that helped me make the case for the kind of the Seville, Barcelona style protected bike lanes that I helped put in and bring to the UK several years ago now. So worth referencing that one. So yeah, in London at the moment, we've got 670. I think it's a little bit higher than that at the moment, because we've really had like a takeoff with the amount of stuff that we've been building over the past year in the response to the emergency. But it's a decent amount. It's the same amount of trips as Amsterdam, I like to say, albeit you could fit Amsterdam in one of the 33 London boroughs. And it's when I'm doing this presentation as well, I kind of work quite a lot around the country, so I might be referencing Leicester or Manchester or London. And I like to feel I'm equally part of all those teams. So yeah, you can see the overall target as well is pretty much a double by 2026. It's still a very low mode share that we're aiming for at the moment in London. It's around about that 3% mark, which is nothing in European terms. I was once told by my colleagues at the European Cycling Federation that if the UK was literally not a part of Europe, then the whole mode share for cycling across Europe would go up a full 1%. So like we're dragging everybody down, and we're trying to do something about it, and we're trying to do something about it fast as well, which is what I'm going to get to. An interesting target for London there, that 80% of all trips need to be done by 26 by walking, cycling, or public transport. So only 20% by cars, by private cars. That's up there with the best in the world. It's a real aim, and it's in the mayor's transport target. So we've got a car reduction target and strategy. And I know Leeds that are nearby to Bradford are putting a car reduction target, and really that's what we've got to get to. Right. That's what I mentioned. That a few more things to cite. This unsuspecting paper here helped me save one of the mini Hollands in London, because we had a point where local residents were complaining to councillors, going, why are you putting cycle tracks in? Why are you doing protected bike lanes? You're going to make it more congested on the road. The air quality is going to get worse. And they didn't know what to say. They were going, oh, well, it is going to get more congested. We are taking the space for cars. And at one stage, we were saying, well, we'll give the money back then. We don't want anything to do with this project. I had to come in and go, whoa down, whoa there. Have a look at what the evidence says. And I cited this paper, and I said, well, for every meter like further away from cars your pedestrians are, there's a reduction in your risk of exposure of 20 to 50%. Here it is. So every meter, 20 to 50%, or you put a cycle track in there, your pedestrians are further away from the cars. That's how you defend it to the local people. We've got to effectively put buffers in between cars and where people are standing. And there's been backed up with further evidence of like a walk at the back of the footway, that kind of thing. But particularly if there's no distance between where the cars are and where the footway is, and you're walking with a pushchair, that's even particularly worse, because the babies are breathing it straight in at the source with no real like dissipation over the area. So the picture shown on the bottom there is one of the superhighways that we put in my time at Transport for London, and you can see the sheer buffer that creates to the pedestrians from the traffic. That's a massive air quality win, and we don't use that defence enough. But it saved one of the mini Hollands, and it should help make the case for you. If you did bike lanes for nothing else other than to buffer pedestrians from the source of pollution, then you'd be on the right track. A little bit more on air quality. It's another research document that I like to quote, and I got all these together in London, and there's a whole economic case analysis on the Transport for London website where we kind of expanded on this, and all the sources are there, and it's a brilliant guide. So I'd recommend everybody look at it. But this paper is really interesting. Yeah, so it kind of says that the people that get it worse in terms of pollution, the people actually inside motor vehicles, because the poor air pollution hasn't got anywhere to escape. And that's something that you can say when people go, well, I drive, it's convenient, and like I need to go fast for the air quality. Going, actually, you're getting it worse. Sadly, if you really unpick it, it's actually bus passengers that actually get it worse than car drivers. So it's something that you really need to do something about. Anyway, there you go. It's another thing to quote. So if it's so polluted out there, should we even let people go out and be physically active? Well, here's a paper that helps make the case for that. So like you can go out there, if you're being physically active and walking, it takes 10 hours walking for like the negative impact of the poor air quality to override the positive impact of the physical activity. For cycling, because you're kind of taking deeper breaths earlier into your lungs, it's 3.5 hours, but that's still most people's journey to work. So we're still saying go out, be active. As long as you're active in there, then you're overriding the effect of like the pollution till we sort it all out. So it's a really good paper to look at. Another bit as well that's like one of the things we often say that, well, it's often leveled at schemes that promote walking and cycling is that car engines are more efficient, like the faster they go. So if you slow them down, particularly like, for example, doing a 20 miles an hour speed, which is the equivalent of 30 kilometers an hour, if you slow them down, the engines are less efficient. So actually speeding cars up, we'll get to that when we come to safety, but speeding cars up is actually better for the environment. You get all these kind of nuance points, but this paper here like disproves it. It actually says, yes, okay, if you go slightly faster and you can maintain that kind of regular speed, slightly better for petrol cars, but the slower a diesel car goes or a diesel truck, the better it is, the least pollutants it puts out. And as we've already shown, like diesel cars and trucks are 22 times more emitting. They're the ones that you really got to focus on. So actually, the 20 mile an hour speed had a net benefit over like having 30 miles an hour, and that's the report to cite on that. So we need vehicles going slower, like just on air quality terms. Obviously, we need it for safety. So just to round up this bit before moving to safety and really go on this, because I know you've had a big focus on physical activity. So here's a street in the north. I won't say where it is, but you can see like we've got narrow footways. It's clearly a street designed for cars. There's a motorway slip road that looks quite difficult to cross on the right. Just acres of asphalt, all saying go fast, off you go. That's the kind of situation. So what do we want to make about this, and what can we do about air quality? This is the plan for this one. Now, there's a couple of things to point out. You can see like we reduced the amount of lanes, so a real reallocation of road space, which is something that the government's asking us to do, and I'm glad that got a mention. I was involved in the national standards, and I'm happy to talk people through how to meet them. There are various different ways, and not all of them are impossible. But anyway, so we reallocated road space, so there's only single lane approaches. Might mean it's slightly more congested. It might mean like if you believe some of the evidence and you disproved all the things that I've just shown you, all the scientific evidence that the air quality could get worse. Well, if you look on the right with the cycle tracks providing that buffer for the people that are walking on the footway, and we've used like all sorts of things that we're looking at, but this is like a hedgerow, and there's combinations of trees and hedges that can actually pick up the particulate matter that comes from cars and kind of treat it or hold it until it's washed into the soil, so it doesn't actually infect the people around it. So when you've got the buffer for the pedestrians walking, plus we've got a buffer for the cyclists, and there's something that actually clears the air quality on site. So there's a few major roads in Manchester that we've been testing this, and I can provide figures for you if you're really interested in this kind of a green screening approach. There's a few kind of shrubs and hedge combinations that really seem to drastically reduce the particulates and the nitrous oxides on the other side. So that's what the plan is here. So people can get across the road, they can walk there, but you're really providing this air quality buffer. And that's one of the things to bear in mind as well. Like if you are doing like the low traffic neighborhoods and you're filtering cars out onto some of the main roads, they've got space to treat it there. It shouldn't be, I'm sorry, it's going to get worse there, because on roads like this, people can live on them, people will have to walk on them. There's schools, there's primary schools, but what you do get on main roads is space. And that space, if you're prepared to reallocate some of the road space away from cars, you might get some real concentrations of poor air quality, but you have the option to actually treat it. And that's what I'm trying to show with this picture. Keep going. So we're moving into safety now. I'm really giving you a little bit of a smorgasbord across the topics, and you forgive me for cracking on, but I know you've covered health. It's been a real change in the way we look at road safety in the UK. I often say we're one of the leaders. The road safety audit process is second to none in the UK, as far as I'm concerned. But there's been this whole shift from looking at it in terms of like road safety, keeping people safe, to actually looking at, well, road danger reduction and saying, well, what's actually causing the most danger? And there's a really interesting report that's come out from our Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, PACS, as they're known. And that's like they're an organisation that advised the government. And it's great to hear them using the language that we tried to use in cycling to talk about road danger reduction. And if you look here in terms of what kills vulnerable road users, it's that one in the middle. It's the car again. I'm going to keep pointing them out because it's still the problem what we have across the whole of Western civilization is the damage that cars are doing. And I'll keep returning to it. So cyclists aren't really killing many people walking and cycling. HGVs get a lot of the brunt, and we're looking at that, and they're certainly overrepresented in London on left turns with fatalities. But still, there's so many cars, there's so many of them about there that they're the ones that the problem. They're the ones that we need to do something about. So that's quite interesting to see. This was mentioned as well by colleagues previously, the kind of a new national guidance, and this is the national principles kind of vision document, as I call it, gear change, the bold vision for cycling and walking. And just in safety terms, it's got some great stuff in it. It talks about like having things that are available for people who are 8 to 80. But I particularly like this one in terms of safety. The third principle, that cyclists must be physically separated and protected from high volumes of motor traffic. It says both at junctions and on the stretches of roads between them. So it's acknowledging that cars are dangerous, and it's using that language of protecting them. So it's not just saying take care of yourself, share the road, off you go, look after number one. It's saying actually the bus and the truck in that picture are dangerous, and we need to reduce their road danger. And if they're going to go down roads, then we need to protect people from it. We need to protect cyclists in this case by the use of like a flexible posts and like a segregated tracks, all these kind of protected bike infrastructure. So really good to see the government talking about this, and it's a real gear change, as it were, for our government to be using language like this and really being so bold. And if Bradford's struggling, just think of what some of the other less progressive places are doing. Everybody's like taking a shot off this one, and we're all trying to respond. But it's great that the government is leading the way. Enough advert for the government. What else is happening at that governmental level? I hear you ask. So this is like a more for our like our foreign listeners here. Yeah, the highway code, the official highway code is changing, and it's like again, it's that fundamental change. Again, it's adopting the language of road danger reduction. There's going to be a hierarchy of road users, so it's placing more emphasis of those that cause the most risk, that and those that are most susceptible to it at the top of the hierarchy. So you have to think about pedestrians, you have to think about cyclists, and really that you get the ones who do the most harm bear the most responsibility, and that's a really good thing to say. As usually in our law, if like a car driver drives over a cyclist or a pedestrian, there's the whole like a smidsy defense, we call it. Sorry, mate, I didn't see you. I got it just came out of nowhere and I just hit them. And you go, oh, well, yeah, all right, yeah, no, that's happened to me. And we kind of move on. And that kind of fatality is brushed under the carpet. And now we're saying, well, actually, you should have expected someone to walk out. Why weren't you looking for cyclists? You can do damage when you get into that car or in that truck. Anything you hit at speed is going to die. You've got to acknowledge that and move on. Doesn't quite say it in this language, but I'm doing a kind of fairly liberal interpretation. But it does change the way people approach it. It's not a case of you in a car, everybody should get out of your way. It's like you're in a car, you're a threat to everybody. Be realistic and be responsible with that threat. So I think that's a real big change. It's not come out yet, so it'll be interesting to see what the final language is like and how bold they've gone. But I was involved in early drafts, and it did look quite promising. Right, so yeah, I've been talking about this in general, really, this shift in road safety policy across the UK, and it's been really interesting to be a part of. Lots of authorities have adopted the kind of vision zero that there shouldn't be any fatalities, particularly for pedestrians and cyclists on the road. You know, they're straight from Sweden, that kind of approach. They're about 25 years into it, but people are starting to really adopt it now. The kind of safe systems approach. Like the sustainable safety approach that's used in the Netherlands. I'm a huge fan of that as well. I could talk about that all day. And it's kind of like a British style, like road danger reduction, or albeit I've used at the bottom there a little cartoon that's actually from Holland to explain road danger reduction. With the whole thing, well, which driver is going to be safer on the road? The one with the spike going out, the one with the spike going in. That's fundamentally an interesting way to look at the road danger reduction one. I'll put a little snippet from Transport for London's Vision Zero plan, which is a really interesting thing to see. Reduce the dominance of motor traffic, it says there, reduce danger, fewer casualties, people feel confident, and that provides that kind of mode shift away from private vehicles. So we're taking the cars on, and I do a lot of work around the world and around Europe, and I kind of think London's bolder than the vast majority. When I'm working with the Dutch and the Danes, it's more about putting cycling and walking on a par with driving. They still love the cars. So same with the Germans, and actually we're saying no. We're trying to tackle the fact that these things are dangerous and they are polluting, and we need less of them. And I think the London Mayor deserves a lot of praise for pushing through some really like proactive policies on that matter. And I just took that picture from Twitter last night of a lady saying, "I'm 5'9". Was like all she had to say really, and you can see with the kind of cars that are coming on the road, the SUVs and the whole rise in that things like that on the road where they can't even see a fully grown woman who's my height crossing the road. We've got some incredibly dangerous objects that are being allowed to be put onto the streets, and we have to respond to them, and we have to do something about it. All right, so that's kind of what's happening. All right, so I've got to infrastructure. I'm back in my comfort zone. We got through the kind of policy changes that we've helped make happen. I want to talk to some practical things that we can do at our junctions and on our streets to actually keep people safe in this section. So here's one of the things that London pushed, and I was part of the research group that helped bring this thing. And this is like fundamentally we had a whole spate of left hook fatalities, particularly involving like heavy goods vehicles that were turning left across the path of cyclists. I'll do a translation for European, but that's turning right because we drive on the wrong side of the road, as it were. So we had a whole spate of these fatalities, and we needed to do something. At one site, we had 2 fatalities in a week with the same thing. So we looked at various different options, and this was the kind of favored one. So imagine like where you are in the photo, you're a cyclist coming up to the stoplight there. You can see you've got a green cycle light to go straight ahead, but you see the left turners are held on red. But if you look over to the right of the photo, the ahead cars have got a green. So you go ahead at the same time as like cars do and trucks do, but any vehicle that's turning left is held into a different stage in the cycle. So there's never a point where cyclists are going through the near side and vehicles are cutting across them. So the cycle light will go red, and then you get green for those left turns across. It's just like a completely effective way of resolving that left hook. And we've rolled out quite a lot of these in London now, and we absolutely swear by them. There's a few kind of issues with them, but I haven't got enough time today to go on with them. But we do think it's a real winner. And one of the things we really like about them is that cyclists have got as much green time, as we call it in traffic engineering, as the cars that are going straight ahead. So there'll be plenty of time associated with it. If we were, it's a peculiarity of our rules, but if we were to just let cyclists go on their own, we'd probably give them a really short stage time, and it would make the junction very inefficient. So the fact that we can let them go with other vehicle movements means it's efficient and it's safe. Go back to that. Yes, the last year has really seen the UK rise of low traffic neighbourhoods. Now these are called all sorts of different things around the world, and I'm sure you talked about them today. Um, as well, your 15-minute cities and that kind of thing. Your super blocks from Barcelona. We used to call them filtered permeability and environmental impacts. All sorts of different names. So it's basically some kind of a approach to traffic management that stops cars dominating our residential streets. That's fundamentally what it's about. What this picture's showing as a cyclist riding down the road, there's some kind of coloured pattern to kind of suggest to pedestrians and people that it's safer now to actually cross the road, to stand in it, to talk to people. And those signs there, the so-called flying motorcycle sign, means that no vehicles can pass through there, and that the sign underneath it says there's a camera, which we're trying to get across the rest of the UK, but only London can use them at the moment. Anyway, so there's a camera that'll pick you up and fine you if you drive through that. You have to go through as a bike. So very much a cycle street kind of approach, if you're familiar with that. And we've had 114 of these new neighbourhoods. They're usually about 1 square kilometre in size, and the kind of definition is that no car should be able to drive through these kind of neighbourhood areas. You can go around it, you can stay on the perimeter, but you can't go through. So 114 new ones. London's a massive place, but that equates to 4% of the population of London has got access to these things now, and there's been an almighty hoo-ha as we've been trying to spread these out. I shall get into. But what are the results? What are the evidence of these things? Well, the graph on the top left's a really interesting one to see, because it shows that over the past 20 years in the UK, the amount of cars on the quiet residential streets has nearly doubled, which is phenomenal. Particularly in the rise of sat navs and Waze and your Google Maps, people know all the cut throughs now to avoid the congested main roads, and they've been growing and growing. And we've got the Amazon deliveries and things. It's been getting out of control. So once you might have been able to talk to one of your neighbours, these days it's going to be full of speeding cars, all using your street as a cut through. That's been a real problem. Been a real problem in terms of safety. So let's have a look at what's happened where we've done the low traffic neighbourhoods. You can see there's been like a 70% reduction in traffic injury risk. The collisions are down 70% where we put these interventions in, and the car use has gone down dramatically as well, as you can see on the graph on the right there. So rather than it doubling, we've been halving it. So that's pretty phenomenal. A couple of other benefits that we picked up as well, because we've been researching these things. 10% reduction in street crimes. It's been safe for all modes. We've not been having those kind of boundary impacts. So where we've sent cars over to some of the main roads, there's not been a corresponding rise in collisions there, which is interesting to know, because that's often what people will use against you. Yeah, and there we go. Residents in low traffic neighbours did 20 minutes more cycling a week. I put a lot of cycling stuff in there, but they're also walking more as well. So you've got this all the stats are there. When you do this stuff, when you do some kind of sensible traffic management and give people back their residential streets, people appreciate it. They can then walk, they can go out, they can talk to their neighbours. Kind of back to that kind of Apple Yard study, which shows the higher the flow of traffic, the less likely people are to talk to each other, particularly people on the other side of the road. So it kind of takes away from community cohesion, which is important. I'll just mention a few things that are happening in Manchester. I work with these two up in Greater Manchester. That's Chris Boardman, our walking and cycling commissioner. That's Andy Burnham, the mayor, who's just got in for his second term. So we're all delighted about that. And he's got in and he's promised to do 500 miles of walking and cycling routes in the next 4 years. It's 3 years now, Brian. I should get on it. And he's also, from a safety point of view, doing a road danger reduction plan. So again, that same methodology of thinking about making it less dangerous. And why is this important? I probably should have unpacked it slightly. When you talk about road safety, it's normally a bad thing to start getting more people on bikes. And I know this from studying it in London. I did a 10-year project at the turn of the millennium, and we got lots more people cycling, but the collisions went up as well. And it was really hard to make a business case. People saying, why are you doing this? It's an inherently unstable device, and it makes people vulnerable. They are definitely safer when they're sat in a car. So you're actually causing more collisions than you're saving. It's a fundamentally difficult thing to be faced with as an engineer. And my boss at the time left the profession because he said, I can't work like this. I can't be causing more collisions than I'm saving. I stayed around and tried to resolve some of these issues, which is why I'm quite passionate about it now. So you kind of get in that. But if we shifted to this kind of different way of looking at it, well, why aren't we doing something about the dangerous ones? Why aren't we protecting people? Then it shifts. And the thing that really kept me in the profession was the health value. That there was hundreds of thousands of people that were using my infrastructure that were living for another 10 years. So you've got to weigh that against the fact that there might be slightly more collisions in the short term, albeit there's so many technical solutions now that we're kind of having our cake and eating it, particularly in London, where we're getting lots more people cycling, but the collisions are going down as well because we've solved lots of our technical issues. But anyway, so that's why road danger reduction is a more important thing to say if you're pushing active travel than road safety. The safest person's sat in one of those massive cars that I've just shown you that's completely death proof, whereas you need to expose yourself to get that health and that physical activity going. All right, I've labeled that point enough. Crack on, Brian. Yeah, so a couple of things that we're looking at, the kind of quality standards. So I heard one of the colleagues there talking about the exacting standards from government. Well, I helped put those standards together. They're based on the ones that we used in London, and the ones that we used in Manchester are a slightly stronger version of those. So it could have been worse. We could have been asking for more, but we do need a fundamental transformational change of our street environment. And that's why the main funding that's coming out from central government is called transforming cities. It's not called safety improvements in cities because that could go anyway. It's called transforming them, and it's transforming it to make it better for people walking and cycling. So anyway, what do we need to protect people from? Turning conflicts. Here's someone walking across the road, and in the UK we don't have the kind of yield on turn behavior, so you've just got vehicles swinging in and out, and this whole when we've got a heavy stream of turning traffic cutting across a walking or cycling stream, that's one of our critical issues, and we need to do something bold. We need to put in some infrastructure, and we need to resolve these things. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. A couple of pedestrian ones here, like trip hazards are everywhere, and we define trip hazards in the Manchester stuff. And I note that we've got national cycling guidance out there, but there isn't national walking guidance. But I've already written those under the healthy streets, like a check, and we've been using those in Manchester as well. And here's one of the things from it, like a non-contrasting level difference of greater than 20 mil. So the things that trips you up is the thing you can't see. So that is taken from a footway, and it's a classic situation where someone's made up a bit of space to get to a development, in this case a shop. They tried to match the materials of the footway. It's too well blended, and no one could pick that up, and it's that perfect height to catch your foot and trip people up. And it was interesting at this shop, you can stand there for 5 minutes and you will see someone tripping up and falling. They painted it white, painted the curb white in the end to show that kind of contrast and resolve that critical issue. But we have to spot them. People will get into the cars if they're tripping up every time they go through there. Another thing we're looking at is pedestrian desire lines. I'm moving away from this whole engineering approach of saying we're going to control people. And as long as everybody does exactly what we've thought through as engineers, we're all fine. Well, human beings are human beings, and they're going to want to cross where they want to cross. And you can see on this photo example that there's clearly a path cutting across the path about midway, cutting across the grass rather, that's heading towards a whole series of parked cars that have been formally invited to park on the footway. So we're saying that's a critically bad issue. That's clearly somewhere where pedestrians are going to cross. They're coming out. It's a clear desire line. It's not been met. You need to do something about it. The other thing we're saying, Manchester, is if the roads are busy, every 400 meters, there should be a formal way to cross the road. It's an interesting one for network managers. I thought I'd pick up a few more of these issues. Okay. Here, the standard of the crossings, welcome to a UK way of crossing the road. you might be able to notice about this that we've got like the pedestrian studs and we've got the tactile paving. That all looks good. But the thing that's missing is the green man. There's never a time when there isn't cars moving across those studs, particularly ones on the far side. Ones on the far side, it'll either be like the left turners coming from the minor arm or the heads coming from left of screen. Now, there's always a point when there's cars going across there. So effectively, pedestrians have to wait and judge when they run across the road. This is like a standard signal operation across the UK. What we've done, this is right in the centre of London and Westminster, huge amount of people walking across there. And because we don't have that yield and turn thing, you just have to look out, you have to run. And I see people all the time, particularly when we get foreign visitors, completely shocked at the way British drivers go. They don't yield to you. They expect you to just run in between the gaps, which is not the highest level of service. So we're saying that's not right. It's a complete standard detail. You can find it in lots of technical guidance in the UK, but we're trying to do something about it so that gentlemen like the one show there don't have to run to cross the road. I mean, we've got the tactile paving there for visually impaired people, but how do they get across that road when you haven't even provided a green man? And there's never a point when there isn't a car swinging across the path of that crossing. So beware of things that look like things but aren't. There's my guide to surviving the UK. Other things that are like completely critical as to us as well is like uncontrolled crossings when there's high speeds, and high speeds where you mix in cyclists as well. And so we've looked at like not just speed limit, but the actual 85th percentile. So what cars actually doing. So streets like this, where there's no footway on one side and there's a little bit of a narrow footway on the other, it's just screaming out to drivers go fast, even though the street lights are supposed to be telling them 30 miles an hour. It might well be that speeds are much higher than there. So we have to tackle this one, because as soon as you pass close by a car doing 30 mile an hour plus on a bike, it's like, well, I could have lost my life there. And it only takes 2 or 3 of those to put people off ever trying it again. And it's the same with pedestrians crossing the road, particularly younger pedestrians. It's not often talked about in engineering, but it's a complete medical fact that children have got like a perception of speed issue. If they're looking at an approaching car on a road like this, if that car's approaching at 40 miles an hour, I'll do a quick translation about like 55 kilometers an hour, or if they're approaching at 20 miles an hour, like 30 kilometers an hour, they can't perceive a difference. Like they've got a really shallow depth of focus. They're looking at it and they can't tell what speed that car's approaching. So one's got an 80% chance of killing them, and the other one's got a 20% chance of killing them, and they can't tell the difference. How would we ever let our children cross 30-mile-an-hour roads? And plus, it's beyond me when the sheer medical scientific evidence says you've got to design these in slightly different ways. So speed is our big one when it comes to safety. All right. So yeah, like marry that up against like the slight like air quality disbenefit of making cars drive at 20 miles an hour, and there's no real debate on it. Okay, so volumes another one. If cyclists have to mix with high volumes, particularly like if they're heavier vehicles, that's a real problem. And it's a real problem for pedestrians where they're uncontrolled as well. One of the main types of pedestrian collisions you get is people crossing in between parked cars, making it part way across. Another vehicle doesn't see them the other way. It's the whole like having to negotiate large volumes of traffic. Very intimidating. Again, the air quality is poor in these scenarios. So we're saying if there's over a thousand vehicles an hour, that's a problem you have to do something about. That's a critical problem. Really, we're aiming where cyclists are mixed, but like that 200 vehicles an hour. That PCU value means passenger car unit, because our unit of modelling in the UK is the car. It's kind of an international one as well, but it's not the pedestrian and it's certainly not the cyclist. It's the car. So we have to get across that. Okay. A few more issues that well we're looking at. I don't know whether you want me to get into this infrastructure detail, but I am anyway. So just bear with me. Like you just the clear, effective width space for pedestrians. Now this is like a kind of loading space, and there's just the width of one paving slab, and you can see how narrow it gets for pedestrians in there. We're saying that's a critical issue. We need at least 1.4 meters clear, effective width for people to walk down, and we have to start putting values on these things. We just say provide a footway, it could be anything. They provided a footway there, it's just not a usable one, and there's huge amounts of these across the UK that we have to tackle. And like it's saying clear space as well, because you might have a footway and it might be 1.4 meters wide, but then it might be a phone box in it, or like a sign or a controller box, something blocking it. So we're saying it has to be a clear, effective width footway of like over 1.4 meters to meet the quality standards. So another thing to look at. And like the defects as well, when it comes to walking and cycling, minor defects that might take authorities many years to correct might be left and go, oh, we've got another few years in that. But a tiny little upstand there could trip someone up. Like a bit of spalling or rutting on the road for cyclists could dismount them and cause like a potential fatal collision. So most maintenance in the UK at the moment is done on cars and potential for liability and insurance damage and where there's big potholes. But really, we should be looking at our footways first and our cycle tracks second. And then if we're following that hierarchy of users, eventually we get to the roads and we sort those out. Really, if cars are going slow, so there can be no insurance claim because whatever the size of the pothole, they should be able to negotiate it. It's when they're going fast and they hit a pothole, that's when the damage comes in. So if you do want to save yourself some insurance claims, lower the speeds. Okay, so I talked about junctions. In London in particular, and it's a similar case across the UK, 80% of our collisions are happening at junctions. This is very different across Europe. Sometimes it can be link arrangements, but our junctions have got a few peculiarities to them, which, again, I don't have a huge amount of time to get into. But this is one of the approaches that we're doing, the kind of Dutch-style protected junction. Albeit we've had to find a way of making it work within our very peculiar regs. But anyway, so we've got like a stage when there's the green lights go from all arms for pedestrians and cyclists, and the pedestrians cross on the inside and cyclists circulate around the outside in a kind of roundabout stage for them. Quite efficient because they're going at the same time as pedestrians. And so actually we're putting these things and actually getting a bit of a capacity win for cars as well. So we're quite excited about this whole kind of protected junction approach in Greater Manchester. And usually, like with our rules, if you were going to do something to protect cyclists at a junction, you'd bring in another stage, you'd try and get that separation in time and space, and that would inevitably bring about delay or like longer pedestrian crossings, which mean you'd have to add time to the junction, which would make them a less efficient. Like I said, this scheme here that we're looking at here was actually a bus scheme. And by doing this kind of operation of sending cyclists around the outside and shortening the pedestrian crossings, we won enough time in the junction for actually meet the business case for a bus scheme because we were speeding the buses through up there. They got through with less delay. So very exciting this, which is why we think it's really capable of being rolled out across the UK. There's it actually built. It was the second one we did. You can kind of see it's fairly clear where cyclists go, it's fairly clear where pedestrians go, and it's fairly clear where cars go. Lots of people can say, "Oh, that looks a bit complex," but once you're down and on the street, you can see it's very clear who goes where and who does what. And like to an extent, most of our UK junctions just cater for cars and pedestrians in some cases if they've got the green man there. Now we're trying to add that third element, cyclists, and we're definitely taking lessons from the Dutch on how to do that, albeit in our own way. The Dutch certainly don't do them like this, but if you squint, it looks exactly like a Dutch junction. Other things that we're pushing through, and this has been talked about as well in the chat. Sorry, I missed the rest of the day. But like the pop-up cycle lanes, like a protected bike lanes. Here's like a UK product called a One Dorker that's been used to protect the cycle lane. And we mean protect is like as soon as you put some kind of a intermittent physical object on the cycle lane itself, then the cars are much less likely to actually incur into that space. In fact, it's normally 100% the record of cars staying outside of it. Whereas if it was just the white line, then you're really talking in some cases 40 to 6% of cars like dipping their wheels into it. And the other thing we found with just paint only cycle lanes in the UK is that car drivers go closer to the cyclists when they see that lane. So you've got that kind of double safety whammy. As soon as we put some kind of object in there, and these things can be quite cheap, that one there's like about €100. You put it on, suddenly your cycle lane works. And it seems to be just enough to encourage people who aren't currently cycling to give it a go. So for a couple of £100, you can turn your cycle into something that people might actually use, which is why we're really excited about the rollout. The inspiration for me came from Seville, where in one mayoral term, 4 years, they did a citywide network of just putting in objects like these and getting the whole thing laid out. I think if we're trying to like tackle our health inequalities and tackle climate change, we need to roll things out quickly. I do for time. I'm doing all right. I'm assuming someone will shout at me when I run over. Other things that we're looking at, and I mentioned this already, was the kind of cycle streets. This is kind of, again, like a Dutch kind of German model of having it where there's no overtaking cyclists, and there's like a kind of slower design speed of around about like 50 miles an hour is really what you want to aim for. Now, in the UK, we can't put a traffic order through, but neither can the Dutch. So we try to recreate a look and feel that would slow cars down, make cyclists feel like they could take a more like central position in the carriageway and feel comfortable doing it. So in this case here, the cobbles are slowing the cars down. Cyclists have got a comfortable space. It looks like something that's been designed for their needs. You can see at the top of the photo how it goes back to a standard British arrangement, but we're getting there. And just a few photos to finish off the safety bit. I really wanted to dwell on this section, so that's all right. So here's like a standard UK crossroads in the middle of a town centre. So again, yeah, lots of asphalt, lots of stuff for the cars to do. Not particularly inviting. Well, just by changing the materiality of things and making them look, dare I say, a little bit more European, people can go out there. Like you can reduce the amount of cars going through the area, and people will hang out, will start socializing. And we kind of need to, particularly at the moment when we're practicing social distancing, we need all the space we can get for people to get out, be active, stay healthy, and like maintain that distance. So this visualization was done before COVID, so we got people nice and close together. Here's a residential street in Manchester. Again, it's saying park on me, it's saying drive through me, it's not saying play out, talk to your neighbors, have fun there. Just park your car, but you won't be able to go through because it's closed at the top end where there's a new purpose-built crossing that will get people into the park. So you can park your bike on the carriageway, you can hang out, the kids can play, you can socialize, all these things that actually encourage people to get out of the house. And that's really the main game. You don't want people sat in the house and then sat in cars. That's a real nightmare. And one of the principles of healthy streets was, particularly with designing around it, when we looked at it, is like people are going to leave the house twice. They're going to go to work and they're going to come back again. And we can make that commute active, then we'll get two doses of physical activity into them. That was the kind of key. So you've got to have a street environment that like makes you look at it and go, okay, yeah, we'll walk and cycle. That's what this is designed for. Let's give it a go. And for me, this kind of environment says walk and cycle a lot more than our standard UK layouts where the park's closed off. There's cars everywhere. There's no invitation to anything. Some car could turn in at speed. You can see the kind of difference that we're looking at. So that's a fundamental low traffic neighborhood approach. On our main road corridors, what have we got to do? It's clearly all been built around the shifting of buses. Not too bad on the pedestrian side of things, but can we put in some cycle tracks? Can we formalize the parking? Just munch a bit of that road space. That's really what we're looking at doing in the UK when we're doing kind of bigger schemes. And it can look quite attractive. It can look quite integrated. Nice surface quality for the pedestrians, greening on the roof. All these things are being built, and I've shown you a few junctions, but that's what our junctions tend to look like in the UK. You see on the right there's no way of crossing. You're just sprinting across 6 or 7 lanes if you want to go there. And then there's no footway there because there's a massive entrance to the petrol station. You've got to cross the tram lines. There's no green men on most of the arms here. There's staggered junctions, which could take a long time to explain why we do staggered junctions so much in the UK with our regulations. Anyway, nothing about that is saying walk and cycle. Again, when we do one of those cyclops approaches, it looks inviting to crossings. We've got new pedestrian movements in, all while maintaining the efficiency of the junction, I might add. So there's no real reason for us to not do these things. It's just a question of changing the way we work. Leave that. Okay. So really, I'm hoping you can still hear me. And that's not someone saying you've gone silent or anything. Okay. So fundamentally, if we get all these things right, this is what we want to move to. We need to get, like, from a cycling perspective, these are two pictures in London 10 years apart. And the one on the left, we're having to train that lady to take on a hostile situation where she's going to be dealing with cars. There's one right behind her, and there's someone saying, "It's okay. You're going to have to take the lane here. You're going to have to watch out left, right, keep all your equipment on." And I'm saying if we're training people to do it, there's only so many people that we can train, and they have to get really like a focused on doing it. Whereas if we want the kind of mass participation in active travel, we've got to look at the picture on the right there. Well, this person, these are 10 years apart. There's infrastructure in. She's just going about doing cycling as part of her daily business, using a bike. Then she's walking for a bit. She might hire a car at a weekend. All right, that's a shame. But generally, it's part of the culture. We need people to just be able to do this as part of their day-to-day activity rather than having to be trained to deal with a hostile situation. That's fundamentally what all those things go about. And that's the kind of road danger reduction argument that I started off by saying. So I'm gonna finish my talk by talking about decarbonisation and a report that I put together for um, well, for the London mayor, really, for whoever it was going to be on the run up to the mayoral election. It got delayed a year, but like I had this report out there, and I did it with the London cycling campaign. So it was interesting to work with campaigners to actually help state some policy that the mayor might use. But these are the times we're in. All hands to the deck. And so anyway, we looked at all the various evidence and came up with a kind of like a 7-point strategy, and it's kind of shown on the right there, and I'll take you through some of these elements of it with a kind of core three that we needed a proper cycle network. We need some kind of like low carbon shared mobility option and smart road user charging. Let's have a look at these. It's kind of like we're waiting this year on a decarbonisation strategy to come out from government and tell us what to do. But I tried to get the jump on it 2 years ago by saying, make sure you include these things and tried to get it on the mayor's agenda. So we'll see. So strategic cycle network, every city needs one. It's looking pretty good in London and across the UK. We've got the propensity to cycle tool, which tells you where all the key corridors are to cycle. And there was mention of an LC whip that's happening in Bradford. So I know they're looking at these, and they'll be looking at data like this, and all these big dark red lines are saying if you put something in there, then the propensity to cycle is really high there. There's people over in that area that want to make that trip by bike. It's short enough, it's direct enough, the census data kind of backs it up. So that's the one to go with. So we've got all that now. It's a question of like, how many can we do? Kind of still need that kind of local cycle now. Oops, sorry. Mess this one up a little bit. Yeah, just to back that up, that kind of network planning, really. I'm just doing a little bit of a shout out for a study I did several years ago now and we actually sent like engineers around the world to look at what people were doing, and we've got all the standard like approaches that people took, and then I started testing them at Transport for London. Can we do them in the UK? There's a whole bunch of regulation changes that we got through. And a lot of what I do at the moment is go around the UK and tell people, look, you can do this, this, and this now. All these issues that we've had for people walking and cycling, we've got technical ways to resolve them. And people are going, oh, really? Oh, wasn't it just in London? But now we started doing it in Manchester and Yorkshire and Liverpool are all having a go at these techniques now. So I'm hoping we're catching up slowly. So shared mobility, like it's been a big debate everywhere in the world, and it's starting to come into London now. In particular, we've had trials going on of e-scooters. My personal view is anything that gets someone out of a car is great, albeit like initially these things weren't lasting long when they were used across the world, and so it's actually quite a high carbon footprint on them. But they are like a what we call in transport planning a classic disruptor of like the auto hegemony. So like if you want to get someone out of a car, they're more likely to jump on one of those. Those people that would never get on a bike, that hate cyclists. Well, would you get an electric scooter? Yeah, they look quite fun. I'll give it a go. Great, you're out of the car. We've got you now. You're in the world. Now you want quality streets. Now you want people to be able to cross the road. Now you want things to see and do. Now you're going to actually stop and use that local shop. All good. So there's some interesting things. This report from Portland was like one I often cite when we're saying why e-scooters. And really, it just had some great stats in there about the amount of people that would have taken the car, but the e-scooter was there. So they did it. It was like 50% of the usage. I've forgotten the stat now, which is a bit poor of me. And the whole like micro mobility hubs and changing to mobility as a service. Some people think it's kind of a lot hot air, but I think we've got to test it. If we can get people to stop owning cars, then that's going to be a real big one. We'll have to see, won't we? So smart road user charging as well. These are all the essentials, as I'm saying, to head towards decarbonisation. We have to start making people pay for the damage that they do. And there's been a few people looking at this in London. We've already got the congestion charge. Great, that was a real game changer. When we put that in the mid 2000s, meant we could tie over loads of space to bus priority and start making a more efficient network. Brilliant. We now have got like the clean air zones, and we're kind of pushing it further, but really like it's one flat charge on the congestion charge zone in London, and we don't think that's really like the best way of doing it. So one fee will get you driving around in your polluting truck all day long. Kind of think it needs to be like a more distance-based model. So the longer you go, and maybe even with that kind of easy jet approach, where if you're doing it at a non-congested time and you're not going very far, you should be paying a lot less than someone's right in the middle of the congested period and they're doing lots of driving. So I think there's smarter systems to do that. There's some next gen stuff that's happening in Singapore and the like, and lots of people are looking at this kind of real time information. But I wanted to show this graph on the left, which something that I often talk about. And there's a few different ways of looking at it. It's basically how much of the damage caused by cars is actually paid for from general taxation. So the degree of internalization is the way that the EU put it. And there's a few kind of backup studies, and I'll refer you to that Climate Safe Streets report if you want to see all the links. But yeah, it's interesting, like every man, woman, and child in the UK is subsidizing car use through general taxation and through various other methods to the tune of €900 a year. And it's the very similar figures right across Europe. So for all that the stuff, there's a certain amount that's recovered through vehicle excise duty and the so-called like road tax that people pay, but the vast majority is paid for other taxes. So if you don't own a car, you're still subsidizing those that do. You're subsidizing the damage that they do to the climate, to people's health, to road safety collisions. It's all totting up to around about that figure, and the cost across Europe is in the trillions. €1 trillion a year cost for like the car-based system that we've adopted, and that's when all the other charges go in. So it's a bill that we can't keep paying. We have to get in there, and all the evidence is out there. I know at the EU level, at the highest level, are having serious discussions about this. So we're not just saying walk and cycle for fun. We have to fundamentally change the way, because it's just unjust. If people paid for the damage they were doing, then the actual taxes would be through the roof for people. And people go, well, you can't do that for cars. We all drive. This is the war on the motorist. But like your children are paying for the car that's speeding past their house. That's another way of looking at it. And so the low traffic neighborhoods was a big thing that we pushed, and I've already mentioned it several times, but we think a mass rollout. The kind of Dutch model that we're adopting is that you've got a whole series of connected low traffic neighborhoods that connected with strategic corridors that have the crossings of the perimeter roads. And that's the kind of model that we're doing right across the whole of Greater Manchester. That's what London's looking at. That's what I did in the Sheffield City region, and I'm doing it for several other places across the UK, trying to get to that kind of model of rolling it all out. And that the world's shifting to this model, just as. And some of the background evidence about this, I've already mentioned the air quality stuff. And just from doing like one walking and cycling scheme in Waltham Forest, you can see the air quality. Everybody there is living for like half a year longer as a result of just doing some walking and cycling schemes. So we swear by this sort of stuff, and there's a couple of documents there to look at. But I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to do this quite quickly now. Zero emission buses absolutely have to happen. Buses are the most efficient way of getting people past a point, whether you like them or not. They're like I happen to like them. I'd rather like that 80 people are on that bus than 80 people are in cars, because you'll never shift them. And if we can find a way of making these things cleaner, there's still going to be the air and brake dust, so we're still going to have to mitigate for that air quality. But if we can get a cleaner bus fleet out there in the UK, that's going to be a massive change. And really, we've got to look at, well, buses are quite polluting, but they are really efficient at shifting people. And it's going back to that air quality point of view. What's actually making people not get on the bus is the congestion, and it's the congestion caused by cars. So it's all pointing back to that same issue. We need to get the cars off the road. We need to look at like more charging. Anybody that doesn't necessarily have to be there, anybody that could have been doing that trip on the bus should be in that bus. And then the bus is not sat in congestion and the bus is going through, making it more attractive for more people to use that bus. There's this whole virtuous circle that you can have if you start tackling it. And we're at such a state in the UK that we're going to have to tackle this in like a stronger ways. And as we keep missing our targets towards like the Paris climate change targets and the rest of it, it's going to get stronger and stronger, the things that we need to do, to the point where we're going to have to impound all the cars and say nobody can drive in the UK. And we're getting to that point. In 2 or 3 years, we would have spent up most of the emissions. So anyway, there's that happening. So yeah, low carbon freight's another one, really like cause an enormous amount of damage to the road, and they are quite polluting. Shifting over to low carbon freight's not that easy because you're still talking about massive batteries, and then you've got like oh well, you're going to be using cobalt, and that's based on child slave labor. Anyway, you can go on. I'm rambling a bit, but like we do need to clean up freight, and we need to find some way. Or if they're absolutely essential trips that need to be made, then those and no others. We need to start cutting things down again. Choose that private car. So there's some really good evidence coming through now on decarbonisation, and I'm really excited about getting the government through. And we had like a citizens climate action group that got together, and they're all saying less cars, please. So people are starting to realise this. And there's a report there in the ultra low emission zone, and it's looking really good in terms of its like reductions, but it's still that kind of drop in the ocean of where we need to get to. There's still the option of like getting bike freight and like getting more efficient ways of shifting people. There's a cab version that's based on a bike. We've got like like pedal cabs, lots of them in London at the moment, and the Pedal Me app, I definitely would recommend those. But yeah, at the end of the day, 30 million cars somehow have to get off the streets. Or certainly at least half of them if we're going to get anywhere near our challenge. And one of the issues we've got in the UK is that people think electric cars will save us, and it's really not going to be the case. It's just selling more cars. We need less of them, and we need people to take that kind of active travel option. And in London, the majority of residents don't own cars, but that's like seems like a madness to the rest of the UK. But we need to get there. And car-free planning, just finish on this one. Just like this is kind of a real weird scene in the UK to see somewhere where the cars aren't parked directly outside the house, and then there's a garage for your extra car, and the other one. Just getting to the point where we're building new housing, and it's not built around like dependency on car use. So this is one in Cambridge that's gone in there. That's looking pretty good. And still in London, it's pretty good. These figures aren't too bad, where you're looking at how many car parking spaces need to be allowed for each property. But there is still cases where it's not car free. And the PTAL score is the public transport accessibility level, and everybody needs to be doing this kind of analysis. And it's saying, well, actually, if it's not very good, you should still give them space for a car. And I say, actually, if it's not very good, you need to make it better so they don't need the car. And again, get into that kind of virtuous cycle. Anyway, some things to think about. There's a kind of timeline for how we want to decarbonize transport in London. We've got to remember that the transport sector has been getting worse as all other sectors have been getting better in terms of CO2. So there's going to be a lot of heat on transport, which is why the government's saying such big things. And we've kind of done a step-by-step plan, which I'm hoping the mayor will launch into. And we did this before COVID, and I have to say, like the amount of action in London in the last year, they definitely helped meet the early part of this project. So we really had a kind of jump start on things. So things are looking a lot more positive than they were when we started writing that report. Just again, I'll finish by just showing what changes we'll see on the street. This is like a layout of a street in London. It does look like this: the central reservation, the dual carriageway, and the bus lane, and the kind of footways. Step by step, what do we do? Well, can we get the buses moving properly? Let's get the bus fleet going, shifting along. That'll give us some marginal improvements. Then can we do some for cycling? Okay, still keep the buses and the cycling and really start hitting that private car use by like congesting their space, introducing like clean air zones. to like the kind of final picture, really. Any vehicle that's there has a reason to be there. It's not just going through there. It's the buses don't need their own dedicated space because there aren't that many cars, and then we can tie space over to actually mitigate and clean some of the pollution that's coming off these cars. We still maintain our dedicated space for pedestrians and cyclists, and everything's a little bit clearer. So that's kind of what we're working to, and I'll kind of leave it there because I think I've definitely taken up my 40 minutes. I'll see if there's any questions. If that made sense.